Welcome to the GridMod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hello and welcome to the GridMod Pod. Today we continue the series of the AEIC Center of Excellence. I'm your host, Francis Frank. And once again, I am joined by my esteemed guest, Dr. Elizabeth Cook. And Dr. Elizabeth Cook is the Vice President of Technical Strategy at the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies, AEIC. Today, our topic will be on SMRs, which is small modular nuclear reactors. Dr. Cook, welcome.
When you're introducing, you're so formal compared to my lovely introductions. Yeah, so today we thought, a technology that is gaining interest and the conversation is percolating to the top. And what I mean by that is, being in the industry for 20 years, there's first this discussion of wind being an opportunity to, provide new ways of on-site generation, energy source. Then very quickly it was, how do we connect our solar? Then very quickly out of that came battery energy storage. And I think something that's percolating and becoming more of an available technology due to really the great history is small modular reactors. And so we're finding that I think there's a space for this conversation, because when we are looking at the full system and all of the various components, we should make sure we kind of get the right language and bring the correct awareness of what these things are and how they can be a part of the bigger solution. So here we are talking about small modular reactors, SMRs.
SMRs. So today's conversation, I want to break it down in 4 parts, right? So I want to start with the basic understanding of what SMR is. Then I want to get into the technical aspects of it and the safety aspect. Then I want to really touch on the public perception and policy. And then really, as you just touched, what does the future look like and what are the potentials? So that's really it in a nutshell where I want to go with this conversation. Well, let's start with the basic understanding first. Let's lay the groundwork. So what are SMRs and how do they differ from a traditional nuclear power plant?
So I think this is a fun one, because when I started hearing the terminology, small, I instantly think, is this like the box that's everyone talking about is going to be in your backyard and it just like sends energy out of it, But it's not. It's just referencing the size compared to the very large traditional nuclear power plants that we've become accustomed to, which are typically, anywhere from 800 to 2,400 megawatts. Small modular is around, a 300 megawatt unit. So it's a fairly large piece of infrastructure, but it's smaller in reference to what we've traditionally has been understanding and kind of aware of. Also, the idea behind small modular, hence the modular reactor, is they're factory assembled and therefore they're transportable. And the design from conception of this would be a great area to have this type of project to designing the deployment thereof has been expedited or, modularized to a way that can make it more easily deployable. So there's your basic definition of small modular reactors.
Yeah, so when you look at nuclear, it's still considered clean energy. I've known some companies who have what they call zero emission certificates because of their traditional nuclear plants currently. So how can these SMRs contribute to this low carbon energy mix and help address climate change?
So I think something's happening, when we look at the system that we've developed over the last 140 years, we went from the essence of microgrids, which when I say that means we had a commodity that was being created and then there was customers that were seeking that commodity. So your industry, aka steel plants, the railroad industry, really all of the mass production that we were able to do during the turn of the century, there was a demand for generation to be created near the site. And that was really due to the efficiencies of the equipment that were designed at the time. And so we won't have a history lesson of, that basic technology, but over the next couple decades, it was all about how do we create economies of scale? So can I build, said business owner, a large generation plant and run wires to many customers and serve? And so that happened really at the turn of the century into the roaring 20s, where then we decided really in the 30s to make this grid much larger and starting to expand the wires, the transmission, and then distribution into very remote areas. So areas that are farther from the generation plant. So there's a lot to it. But so we've gotten kind of into this fashion that we've created these concrete pillars of large bulk generation, and we've made it highly redundant and reliable because we tied all of these grids together. And so the difference between having the accessibility to the modular reactors, one, as I just said, they're smaller, they're more, one could say agile, or you could build them out in a scalable form. So you could say you only need it to meet one load of 300 megawatts just to keep it even. But there is a possible growth opportunity that would require ultimately 900. Well, you don't have to do it all at once. So it makes really the economies of scale kind of work backwards, one could say. So that's one aspect. So right now, if we wanted to construct and energize a bulk nuclear power plant, we've only done it, I think, once in the recent few decades, which we won't name names. So the idea of having to do that again and creating the right investments in the capital that needs to be upfront, and then really finding those entities that would be willing to take on a risk of such a large, expansive project. This could be an opportunity to deploy that net zero, carbon-free type generation in this big world that we're in of transitioning from aged, less efficient, more expensive fuel that must be carried to site to this on-site energy creation that really is, where we're headed in the ultimate end game. And then also, flexibility of where you place them. And as the planners of the grids and really the commercial folks that need the energy can really select their geographical location. So it's flexible, it's scalable. And I guess the other area is these have not just appeared in the last decade. I mean, small modular reactors, really the formation, the creation has been, if you think about it, our nuclear submarine fleet. Those are nuclear submarines, means that the energy is being generated from a nuclear source, which is, kind of fascinating to think about. So they've been around for long. So from the safety perspective, there's been a significant amount of innovation and engineering going into advancing those designs to create like these passive safety features. So to ensure that we don't have any or minimizing the risk of catastrophic failure. So I think it's something that we also don't talk about. And since they've been around for many decades, like it's coming, as I said, with percolating to the top as an ample opportunity to be a tool in our toolbox. So I think, flexible, scalable, and more safe.
Yep. So let's move on to the technical aspects. So we consider nuclear, as I mentioned before, clean energy, right? And when this topic of clean energy, people really think about wind and hydro and solar and things like that. So how do SMRs compare to other clean energy sources like wind and solar and hydro in terms of cost, reliability, and the big one, environmental impact?
When we think about what it takes to adopt and then scale any new technology, the timing has to be impeccable and the right players have to be positioned. And so I think a significant amount of work has been happening, in the roots of where this technology has been sitting in regards to quantifying that cost. So as with anything, doing it the first time or maybe the first dozens of times, you will have higher costs because there's a lot more unknowns. And that's with everything in life, which I think a lot of us as beings forget. From going from an idea of nothing to executing and scaling, there are a lot of lows and there's a lot of ups, but it's understanding that full transitional journey. All I have to say is, every new technology that has been embraced, deployed, and now being utilized had a significant cost before it became something more affordable. But if you pencil out the SMRs from where we're sitting in regards to the long-term operational stability of this device and really the low life cycles in regards to the emissions, it really does start to compete and if not beat those other technologies that have been around now for 20, 30, 40 years, which is the ones you spoke of, solar, wind. So I think it's almost like a double-edged sword. It's kind of coming ahead of the game. It's been really underappreciated or valued, but now that the cost effectiveness is kind of becoming a reality, we're going to see more of it. And then it takes away, when comparing them, SMRs, takes away the intermittency. Right? These can be base load power sources, just as hydropower can be. Of course, that depends on your geography. And so SMRs have a little bit more flexibility and they're dispatchable. So that kind of meets this dynamic challenge that we've all been championing for the last 3 decades in regards to inverter-based resources and the intermittency of them. But then I guess, from an environmental impact, I don't want to say by naming all these benefits against the others means I'm in favor of one or the other, because I truly believe the more sources you have in your stack, the more flexible and reliable your ultimate solution will be. But all that to say is these have a smaller land footprint just from space. And so from an impact to the environment, it's less. And then, of course, the others don't generate this thing called nuclear waste. But, I think that's a whole other topic when we talk about what is nuclear waste, what does it mean, how do we process it, where do we contain it. Of course, that's a whole trend of thought, which again, I think we have a very strong grip on. It's just how do we communicate it, what words do we use, and how do we ensure that the mass population understands what they need to know and then ultimately trust in the systems that are established to keep all of us safe. Just a little,
The last portion of that answer led me to my next question, which is public perception, right? Because when I speak to many of my friends on SMRs, even some people in the industry, they question the safety. They talk about this nuclear plant or this other nuclear plant that had this mishap X amount of years ago. So public concern and the public perception is just as equally as important. So how can we address those public concerns and promote that acceptance of the SMR technology?
I think, and I said this actually in the last podcast they just recorded, but I think it's ever more important that, having this platform, having this ability to communicate to anyone that's willing to listen and learn, takes every bit of information with a perspective that they're going to do their due diligence to explore the larger context. And I think that's happening as our society. We're not only having a transformational change of what is energy and how do we use energy and what can be energy, that whole stack. The way we transport and the fuels that we use in transportation is transformationally changing, as well as our food source and our materials and supply chain. I think the one that we don't talk about, and maybe we do talk about, but maybe not in this field, this industry, where this is where it's ever more important, is information. How we create it, how we deploy it, how we absorb it, how we process it, and then how we share it has changed more in the last 10 years than probably since man learned how to write. Because if you think of the power of the word and how we conceptualize information and put it into a piece of paper and then transfer that paper around, it takes time. It takes certain levels of accessibility. And now we have this enormous amount of information being created. So how do we effectively create organizations that we can lean in on for guidance and understanding? So the perception of nuclear has been varying, right? Since the creation of it. It didn't start off in the best foot. We tried to create, something good of something that was created through the, atoms of peace. We went full steady ahead, developing the nuclear power plants that we know today. And then sadly, we've had many incidences, and I don't know if it's many, but enough that has created a perception not only from the generations that occurred, but the generations thereafter. So I think, one of the reasons why small modular reactors haven't really been elevated to that level is, are we ready to advance the communication plan and the effective tools to really manage the change, not only within the industry, but the change of our own human bias? So I can get really philosophical really quick. So we just have to say and lean in and become the effective resource, whoever that may be. It's not, me or you, but I think just sharing the idea that this needs to happen is strengthening the positive perceptions around the contributions that they can make, the great history and all of the advanced safety features that have been designed, developed, and now are being deployed within these systems. Also look at the enormous recognition towards job creation, economic development, accessibility to energy in remote areas. I mean, it answers a lot of great questions and problems that we're all kind of seeing as we're exploring this massive energy demand that we're all asking for. And then highlighting the flexibility and scalability of it, while also knowing that there are these negative perceptions, and while driving positive, not being ignorant or ignoring the negative, right? You have a certain impact on the nuclear waste, the perception of it, the long-term management, all of it, right? The reduction and the recycling. Of course, safety, which safety is number one for utilities. And there is a lot of skepticism, and I think there's skepticism in all new technologies, right? No one likes to be the new guy. A lot comes with it, but there is an economic hurdle that must be championed. But I say, we were able to put a man on the moon in the 1950s. There was a race, right? So the amount of enormous engineering and development that went in to achieve certain goals, if we put our minds to it, we can do hard things. And then I said this a couple times, but there is this aspect of trust that we as a society, and creating the synergies of the right folks at the right tables. So trust in the regulators and trust in those that operate the systems, gain that confidence back. And so I really didn't provide the effective 1, 2, 3 step approach to solving, but I think just highlighting, yes, there's the positive perspectives, focusing on them, while not ignoring the negatives. And I think one of the basic negative is misunderstanding of SMRs. So here we are trying to debunk some of the few maybe hidden biases that some of our listeners might have, or just a nugget of information that might drive their own research and, drive it towards, something of plausibility and then ultimately positivity, which then can create action. Because I think we forget that small and mighty, right? In our great history, there's characters that have been able to champion very novel ideas that have driven great impact that they may not know the time that it's happening. It may happen in years to come. So just being aware of that. Thanks for this topic. I think you tricked me to merging my two favorite passion projects into one.
I always enjoy our conversations. I come back every time with my pen and paper just to learn from you too as well. So we've touched on the basic thing. We went to the technical aspects. We just touched on the public perception. Let's talk about the future now. That future outlook and potential. And to be quite honest with you, you've touched on some of them already. But what are some of the future prospects of SMR and the potential from the global energy landscape? Because people talk about us being a global village, right? But when you look at energy and the future of mankind depends on energy. So where do you think the role of SMRs is when it comes to that? whole global energy landscape.
I love that. I'm going to hold space for this.
So,
I mean, you're talking about global equity and how can the advanced technological bodies of beings support developing nations that maybe don't have the large NRC or the large extension of IEEE and all of the nuclear energy engineering schools, right? Like global equity is like ensuring that not only are we advancing it for our own geographical location, but realizing that this can become a viable option to remote areas and those cultures and civilizations that don't, have the means to create these robust infrastructure projects that are really needed. If they could ground themselves in the flexibility and modularness of SMRs, then these grids can be advanced in ways that really I don't think we've thought of because it wasn't really accessible. And so I think that's just at the forefront without creating this dependency of these particular components and making sure that we're thinking of it holistically. Also, I think it does come back to a very community involved engagement, ensuring that the education is being done from early start all the way through educational. But that's said for the whole energy industry, but particularly this one is it's taking it from ground zero to a scalability. There's an opportunity here, I guess is what I'm saying. So knowing what we've done in the past, how can we pivot and ensure that we're bringing the full gamut into the conversation? So, that's pretty soft, but it'll take work. And, I think showcasing, and my last topic is success stories. So one may say that these are a long way off, but we have effectively signed agreements for a small modular reactor in one of our PJM queues, which means, it's within this time frame of you and I sitting here still working in this industry. I believe we will see an SMR, and from that we'll scale. So ensuring that when these do happen, that they are safe and successful, and then we share those stories not only to ourselves, but to the larger industry. I don't know. I feel like I might go in too many places here, Francis. So we'll leave it at that.
So, as the VP of Technical Strategy at AEIC, you meet a lot of interesting folks, but you're also aware of most of the emerging trends there are in the industry, right? So what are some of the emerging trends and innovation about SMR, that could revolutionize this whole energy sector?
So I thought we weren't going to talk about this. Like, we don't say Voldemort. We don't say data centers. Just kidding. But I believe there's, something happening. And it's not because of my role that I identify this, because everybody is talking about it. At our beginning of our conversation, we talked about this idea that we go ups and downs. And first it was, wind's not going to work and we're not going to have any. We have a significant amount. Solar, we have a significant amount. Energy storage, we have a significant amount. There's a lot of naysayers. I think they all need to have a little positive perspective, approach with a little negative, unbiased come along. But anyway, to say, if you think about what happened in the last 5 years, is we were in an area where some pockets of the world, growth was occurring. And so the need for grid expansion and development. A lot, we're seeing a steady eddy where energy efficiency that really took claim in the 90s started to ramp a lot of that energy use down. So we've had an industry that's really been moving along in a space where their commodity was not growing. If anything, the position was to ramp down, knowing that, this can go. Well, with the technological advancements of making more efficient heating and cooling systems, integrated inverter-based resources that allow on-site generation at a scalable form, the accessibility to the up-and-coming electrified vehicles. Some may say they're not here, but they are here in a large part of the grids. And then out of nowhere, we get hit, and it's not out of nowhere, but with data centers that are asking for citywide load requests overnight. So it's almost somewhat of a perfect storm where the industry was already having somewhat of a delayed response to the capacity that was being asked for the existing growth, which was that stagnant, slow-moving growth with some pockets, to now almost like a hockey stick of exponential requests in a large part of our global grids. I said all that to really highlight that this is an opportunity for nuclear, especially small modular reactors, become a big part of that solution, as well as some of the other baseload generation that we've known and grown and have accessibility to. So I think that is kind of at the crux. And it'll be cool to listen to this episode in 2 or 3 years and see how close we were to predicting the rapid change that will occur in many processes that are going to be challenged in how utilities serve safe, reliable, affordable power. And I'll just caveat the one opportunity of being the technical strategist at AEIC, it does allow me to have these amazing conversations with the empowered leaders that are driving this transformation. And I'm really here to help connect the dots, create the networks, build the relationships, and make sure the gaps that are occurring between R&D and then really like the physical deployment, are we effectively gaining the awareness of these needs to those that can solve those problems? And that's the power of AIC and the Center for Operational Excellence, is really connecting the networks so the right people in the right seats can actually drive this transformational change efficiently and therefore rapidly, knowing everything that's happening now. So thanks for this awesome interview, Francis.
I like your plug that you're able to fit in there, to be honest with you. So, I have one last question, and I know you touched on it, but I know, social justice and the implications of social injustice and the ethical considerations very dear to you when I follow you in different mediums. So, considering that, how you think that SMRs can help be that great equalizer, or perceived or potential to be that equalizer when it comes to that?
Yeah, so, I think that's another pretty hardy, deep, this is Dr. Cook speaking, nobody else's opinion. And I actually just wrote an article about this, not that I wanted to plug that one, but truthfully, we are in this space as just beings, a significant portion. And then, there's this gap of inequality, right? And if you think about when electricity was first formulated, right, it was the whaling industry provided, animal fuel was how we lit up our nights. And then we created this space with kerosene and brush lighting, and then ultimately led to electrical lighting. And those that had access to it at the turn of the century were the haves. And it wasn't until we created really, and I'm just speaking from the state's perspective, a lot happened globally, and there's still a lot to happen globally. But we created a forum and a unified decision to electrify rural America. And so we went from a system of haves to creating an equalizer system of have and have-nots. And then when you think about, like, you said social justice, like, what is that? That's very dynamic. So I won't dive deep, but just from the periphery, is how do you create systems that serve not just some, but all? And so how do we ensure that we do not go into a space of have and have-nots again, more expeditiously, with this dramatic ask of the grid that exists for one set of variables, knowing that they're dynamically shifting with all of what we just talked about? So if you're going to put how can SMRs help with the inequity, the justice, and really a systematic change, I think, just fundamentally ensuring that the innovation thereof is human-centered, which means it brings the altruistic, empathetic appreciation of what makes civilization work. And then accessing, and bridging those energy gaps of where the energy is available and plentiful and where it's not, and then identifying the marginalized communities based on their critical services and ensuring that SMRs could possibly be the resiliency hub to that sector. And, kind of like with battery energy storage is like one of the tools in the toolbox. We created this massive grid to support all, and now we've created an inequality that's fragmenting the grid. So how do we bring it back into these microcosm and ensure that the grid isn't too big to fail and we centralize some of the power sources at the community level? And SMR could be a great opportunity to do that. Without going again further, you're going to get me all on another soapbox. I think that's, really how we have to think about it. Ensure that we do it in a way, again, that doesn't create more inequality, but merges.
Well, that was my last question.
Okay, I'm sweating.
I didn't mean to make you sweat. I truly just wanted to ensure that I know you're passionate about that.
I guess, but I'll end it here. I think the more we understand and the fostering the connections of the human aspect in driving these next set of solutions, really the world of abundance exists. So doing it with that right perspective will unlock a tremendous amount of efficiencies so we can utilize the grid as is while unlocking an area of abundance that can serve many. And we have yet to really probably understand it, or someone has designed it. So I look forward to that and working in this industry with folk like you. So thank you, Francis.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cook. And folks, that's a wrap. Looking forward to the next episode where we'll get another fun topic in the industry. Thank you very much.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.